So welcome, everybody. I just want to test out that you really can hear us. Right, Frank, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. So, yeah. So we're really pleased to have our guest here, Amon Anderson, who I'm going to introduce, and I'm going to have him do a little bit more introduction to himself in just a second. And, those of you who have been in this session before, it's a little bit of a community building. What I'm going to do is I'm going to at least spend about 20-30 minutes, having a discussion with Amon, and then I'm going to sort of open it up to everybody to have a chat. I've got some colleagues here, maybe some more people joining us when we finish upstairs here. But I'll collate the questions. So if you're on Zoom, then we can do. I will take Frank. Would you like me to? I don't want to pause for 20 minutes, but Frank, would you like me to pause for 2 or 3 minutes so that you could get some questions from your class? Maybe
Sorry, Murray. Yeah, that would be awesome. The computer's a little hard for us to work here. It's a big screen with a weird mouse. So sorry, turning off my mic was challenging. But yes, giving us a little bit of time to come up with some questions would be wonderful.
So what I suggest is also, don't be afraid to, write out some questions as we're going along. And so if you're doing a chat, give them to Frank, and then we'll have a sort of 5-minute. We'll do a little interlude. We'll find an interlude so your class can give questions. That'd be great. And if you're on Zoom, please, if you've got questions, please, put them in the chat, and I'll, at any time, when we get to the question and answer session, I'll get to that. Now, nobody gets questions, I'll just keep going because I got lots of questions, so. This is the last session. I think this is we've been talking about today. We've talked about this as Danielle. Remind me, what did you call today?
Change Day.
Danielle, who those of you who don't know, Danielle is our communications director, communications marketing director, and she named this Social Change Day. So we've had a number of sessions with Amon Anderson from Acumen and some of his colleagues today, and this is a sort of chance to have a sort of discussion. So Amon is the co-managing partner, right? Director, co-managing director, Acumen Americas. Been at Acumen since how long have you been at Acumen? Because I've got your.
I joined in 2008.
So and has a storied academic background, I recall, undergraduate, University of North Carolina, graduate Stanford, MBA from Stanford. Not everybody can get into the University of Baltimore. So, but from Stanford, and your prior experience before Acumen was in financial services and investment, with storied companies as well.
You're building me up more than I'm due.
Yeah. Oh yes, I did announce we had some people at lunchtime from the entrepreneurial ecostructure in Baltimore, and I did announce that Amon had come here with bags of money.
Empty bags that I'm looking to fill up. Actually,
we're going to discuss quite a bit about Acumen. And I'm going to ask you to describe a little bit more about Acumen. But Acumen is a global organization. I think it was founded in 2001, and really, main vehicle being, taking philanthropy, donations, but investing these in startups, originally in emerging countries, originally in startups who could have an impact on significant social problems. And that model has spread to the Americas. We actually had, some of you might remember, those of you who can remember, Amon was here in 2017 at the very beginning of the Acumen Americas, and so I think the best place to start really, so everybody's on an even playing field is your description, just what Acumen America does, what the size of the portfolio, because when you came originally, I think, I do recall when you came in 2017, you had 6 portfolio companies. And so it'd be interesting to see how many portfolio companies you have now, but just kind of the dimensions of what you work with and what you're trying to do. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Murray, and it's great to be back. University of Baltimore. It's hard to believe that was 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago now. So moved by my time here on the last visit and all the work that you all are leading and the really remarkable leadership and entrepreneurship and impact that's coming out of this place in this hub. And so it's really struck me in that last visit, and it's great to be back and excited to continue coming back and seeing how we can support that good work here and partner together. So Amon Anderson with Acumen, and really looking forward to this conversation today. As Murray mentioned, Acumen is a 20-year-old impact investor, and our core belief is that entrepreneurs play a critical role in tackling problems of poverty around the world. And there's all sorts of tools that and resources that those entrepreneurs need to tackle these problems. We talk about leadership and both skills and network that are required, and also the capital that's required to support taking these ideas to scale. So over the last 20 years since Acumen was launched, we've built activities really all across the globe, and in the US and Latin America, Europe, West Africa, East Africa, India, Pakistan, and have invested in hundreds of companies around the globe and reached thousands of leaders that are building these ideas and really building a movement of those that believe in entrepreneurial solutions to poverty. And I got my start with Acumen. I just said 2008 to save myself from doing the math, but I guess I have to do it. That's going on 15 years. So I'm waiting for my gold watch this year, or fresh set of business cards at least. And got my start with Acumen in Nairobi, investing in agriculture and water sanitation entrepreneurs in East Africa. Spent about 5 years there, a couple of years in New York, and I grew up in rural North Carolina. Sitting in Nairobi, in this place where this really amazing crucible of entrepreneurship, you were seeing entrepreneurs sort of leapfrog, broken systems and inventing ways to move money around, and that, we hadn't even contemplated here in the US, and thought, gosh, back home in the US, where we've got, capital markets investing in entrepreneurs all over the place. We've got, much more robust social safety net. Why aren't we seeing the same ecosystem of entrepreneurs solving for, these persistent problems of poverty? And so I, came back, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, thinking I know how to build a financial model. How hard can it be to build a fund? Turns out considerably harder than anticipated. So, went back to, I learned the hard way, the entrepreneurial journey, that, these lines are not straight, and went back to business school to lick my wounds and, build a better plan, and came back to Acumen to launch Acumen America. So, my first visit to University of Baltimore, we had just launched Acumen America, which is with 6 portfolio companies. And our model here in the US is to invest in early stage entrepreneurs that are serving low-income communities around the country. So we raise philanthropy to do that, and we turn around and invest that in for-profit companies, which is a bit of a unusual structure. But the reason that we do that, the reason we raise philanthropy, is so that we can take extraordinary risk to back the big ideas that are going to be transformative and scale up to the scope of the problems that we try to solve. So we turn around and invest that at the early stage, which is where it's hardest for entrepreneurs to raise capital, where that capital gap is most acute, and then roll up our sleeves to try to add value and accompany those entrepreneurs along the way. So that pre-seed and seed stage investment strategy has translated now into 37 companies that we've invested in. So from 6 to 37 over the last 6 or so years, and really been extraordinary to see how these companies have grown and reached scale. These companies are in healthcare and workforce and in financial inclusion, and all across the country. Not nearly enough here in Baltimore, so excited to continue coming back here until we can find a handful to back and scale here in this community as well. So I've talked so long, Murray, I've basically forgotten your original question. That's as good a place as any to wrap up and wait for the next.
Well, I think that's a good, that's a good introduction. I think it'd be useful, again, just to sort of set the scene, just to, talk about, maybe concretely, some of the, what some of these companies are doing that you're investing in, and because you're right that they're often, these entrepreneurs are dealing with, we're also, I was equally fascinated by the kind of projects in the emerging world and about how the entrepreneurs from very difficult situations were able to recreate things, and then also ask the question if it can work in Nairobi. I said, I think I actually did a dinner with Acumen here in Baltimore in 2015 before you came. But I actually asked that question: if it works in Nairobi, why can't it work in Baltimore? So it'd be interesting to look at the kind of, the types of businesses that you're financing. So give some examples of the types of businesses and the kind of problems they're solving. Great, how they're solving them.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that sort of connectedness between innovation across those boundaries. One of the companies that we've invested in is a company called Isuzu, and in the financial services space. The founder, Wamimo Abbey, grew up in the slums of Lagos and moved with his mom to Minneapolis as a kid. And when he and his mom moved, they, went to the bank to try to, buy a car, go buy a house, and see what options might be available to them. But what they don't give you when you immigrate to a new country is a credit score. And as someone that's credit invisible, the options available to them were quite limited. And so, he himself grew up, built a successful. So what he did is was able to connect with community and leverages informal credit to access capital that ultimately helped their family get on their feet. And he built a really impressive career himself. And then ultimately co-founded Isuzu as a way to help other folks who are invisible to our credit scoring ecosystem become visible and access capital. So what Isuzu does is it helps those that are renters in this country connect their rent payment data to the credit ecosystem, so that my regular monthly rent payment, which shows my ability to provide to regularly pay my most meaningful bill, all of a sudden that can prove your bankability to a traditional lender. So somebody that's in credit invisible, no credit score, so can't get a credit card, can't buy a car, can't buy a house, can go right into a 650 credit score overnight through an Isuzu partnership. Somebody that's credit impaired can improve their scores. They just had a big study that showed that at scale they can improve your credit score by 50 points or more. So really transformative for folks that are trying to build access to the credit ecosystem, and we're partnering with public housing, partnering with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to really see how this solution can reach scale. So the company has now reached extraordinary scale, a Black-led business that's worth $1 billion now, one of the few Black-led unicorns in this country. But when we first met Wamimo, he'd heard 346 no's from institutional investors. We're like, for all sorts of reasons, by virtue, a new American, a Nigerian American with an accent, Black, building this business that doesn't fit my pattern recognition, all sorts of biases that this entrepreneur ticked, and no after no after no. And we were the first institutional investor to commit to the company, and as COVID hit, thought about how we can actually roll up our sleeves and reinvest in this point of difficulty for the business. Now the company has reached these partnerships and really reached an extraordinary set of scale. And so for us, representative in how can we actually back entrepreneurs who confront bias as they raise capital? How can we think creatively about lessons learned across borders and boundaries? How can we step in when people don't? And then how can we really use that patience to help accompany these businesses to scale?
So, because we're a business school, interesting. What is the business? How do you make money out of the Isuzu? I mean, how does a revenue model?
So they basically, much like any credit agency charges for a credit pull of your credit score, they can create this alternative credit scoring methodology that every pull that you take from the Isuzu credit methodology, they can either license that technology, get sort of paid on a sort of subscription basis, or they can charge on a per pull basis for each of those credit scoring. So they basically charge financial institutions that are trying to grow their customer base the ability to tap into an unseen market, an untapped market, for each time that they evaluate the credit score.
So that's financial inclusion. That'd be that's the domain where that would fit. What about in the health related fields, where, you mentioned that earlier, in health, I mean, what kind of problems are some of the portfolio companies dealing with in health?
Yeah. We talk about health deliberately, as broader than just healthcare, which encompasses the social determinants of health or the health related social needs like early childhood education or food. And one company we've talked about, Murray, in Los Angeles that we backed is a company called Everytable, and they are a sort of food justice company. So they centrally produce food at a large food commissary factory that they are able then to sell for $5 or $6 at retail locations around Los Angeles, including in Watts, Crenshaw, South LA, communities that have been structurally disinvested in communities where it's difficult to find healthy food at all, let alone for for a price that's competitive to fast food. And so, because they're able to produce this centrally at economies of scale, they can sell this in a low cost way because they don't have to build out a kitchen. The retail locations are low cost, the production is low cost, and allows them to sell this food at a price point that's attractive and valuable. So I remember we were doing due diligence on this company. I went to the Crenshaw Mall where they'd set up a kiosk, and I sort of looked around at the Panda Express that was $14 for a plate of rice and fried chicken, burger place, pizza place. And, I was, taking notes as I was watching people eat. So it's a little bit of an unusual thing to do at a food court. And so somebody came up and was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, I'm, looking at this company, Everytable." And he said, "I need to talk to you about that. This company is saving my life. There's nowhere else in this community where I can, get the food that's healthy like this. This is transformative," which is really, moving experience. And, the company has gone on. They've got, 30 locations around Los Angeles, expanded into New York, expanding up to the Bay Area, thinking about how geographic expansion can go even more broadly. But I've also thought about, gosh, how do we take this from just our retail channel to serve, even more broadly the food need? So COVID really accelerated that. So many food companies basically, shuttered their windows during COVID. Everytable thought, gosh, we've got this, facility capable of producing, thousands upon thousands of meals, and food insecurity is more, of heightened need than it ever has been. And in California, they were moving folks from the streets, to empty hotels to house folks temporarily, and all of a sudden have taken on the responsibility of feeding these folks. And so Everytable stepped up and signed up contracts with social service organizations at the county and nonprofits. And they actually tripled the size of their business during COVID by pivoting from a sort of retail distribution strategy to an institutional strategy, serving folks experiencing a high acuity food need, which has built another pillar of their business. But I think one other interesting element here is then, the companies, and this was if you looked at our investment memo, none institutional sales wasn't there, nor is the ability to innovate on franchise opportunity. They've built an innovative franchise model that allows entrepreneurs in the communities that they serve to buy an Everytable franchise themselves, which ultimately creates an income opportunity where they can earn hundreds of thousands of dollars of wealth. And so these are, this woman, Susanna, who has she's in Inglewood, very close to the new Clippers stadium and the SoFi Stadium in LA. She had a food cart in LA. And she met the company through an affiliated nonprofit. And now, just last month, got the keys to her franchise, and she owns her own franchise, which has a minimum earning throughout. But the ability as you build in and scale that business to earn hundreds of thousands of dollars in wealth, buy your next franchise. And her vision is really not just to own one, but own a whole network of Everytable franchises and build a path for of intergenerational wealth for her and her family. So it's an example of food as medicine, food access, food justice, food as medicine, and also economic transformation.
I think there's a lot of scope for that in Baltimore. I think on this call, I can identify some franchisees here.
You're ready,
right? And I think am I right? Is there a third pillar to your portfolios, which was education or workforce development?
Workforce development.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this has been the most challenging of all of the sectors that we invest in, and I think because the ecosystem of workforce entrepreneurship is not quite as well, isn't as mature as health tech or fintech. And we have a different lens on that, but we can build on some of that ecosystem that exists. And in workforce, we're thinking about, how do you, better serve community colleges or workforce boards? And these are not as much of an entrepreneurial ecosystem around that. But some really interesting models that have emerged. So we backed this one company called Bitwise that was founded in Fresno, California, basically with the idea of how do you create a technology ecosystem that better works for the sons and daughters of farm workers. Fresno, I don't know, 2 hours away from Silicon Valley, and yet, an ocean away from those kinds of economic opportunities. And the founder, Irma Olgan, grew up rolling raisins in the Central Valley, the sort of bread, which grows so much of the vegetables that we eat across the country. She was able to sort of make that miraculous leap into technology herself, and thought, gosh, how might we transform the economies of places like Fresno that are overlooked, underdog cities as she calls them, to really create workforce opportunity that makes the wealth opportunity in technology available. So they built a technology training program. They built to sort of build out the technology skills, a coding boot camp that was sort of bite-sized and met people where they are, not sort of like, how do we take a classics major from Stanford and give them, like real skills, more like, hey, let's, you can sort of, pick and choose and stack these up and ultimately build what you need. And we'll do this at night. We'll do this sort of in a way that actually will actually work. And as a person with a, with a questionably valuable, degree, myself, I can speak to, and I've earned the ability to, to speak to that the hard way. But it wasn't just about having the skills. They built this co-working space, and so how do we attract all these entrepreneurs from Fresno and give them a community? But then they were graduating these technologists, but they would go in and apply for these jobs, and all this bias would creep in again and say, "Gosh, you don't look like, you don't have that MIT or that Stanford degree. I'm not so sure. We'll go the safe route and give this job to somebody that comes from our typical channels." So they built a consulting company, and they built an apprenticeship company, that they could go in and bolt on an apprenticeship model to these tech companies and say, we'll do that training for you. A consulting company to say, hey, hire us, we'll manage this, risky resource. And they go in and show that these, consulting talent can sort of mop the floor with the, some of the, more traditional candidates that they were hiring. And all of a sudden you're starting to see mindset shift. Now they've gone from Fresno to Bakersfield, all up and down the Central Valley of California, but also to Buffalo and Toledo and across the country to the cities where, the similar opportunity. But how do we sort of, create this technological transformation? And what they've seen in Fresno is that they attribute a 1% growth in the GDP to the intervention of Bitwise in Fresno. And the goal is to think about how can you actually have a similar impact at scale to cities like that across the country.
So I'm going to ask a question that I'm going to merge with Frank Belize's question. Thanks, Frank. And anyone else start putting things in the chat. In a couple of minutes, Frank, I'll give you a kind of a brief interlude and encourage people to get questions. But so Frank is asking about sorry, I just lost it.
Here you go. It's a direct message to me. Look at Merrick.
It's just up there.
Oh, as to you. I'm sorry. So I think there's two parts to this question. I mean, the first thing is, how do you find these companies? I mean, that's the, where does the deal flow come from? And then when you're, clearly you're looking at a different type of entrepreneur, I think here, how do you look at the entrepreneur? I mean, how do you how do you assess that? How do you assess the risk?
Yeah, I think when we first got started, there wasn't much inbound deal flow. Acumen had been doing this work, globally for a long time, but it was the first time investing in the US. And so I think we had to sort of go out and, proactively drive deal flow in. And there were a couple of ways we did that. One was to go out and say, hey, let's build relationships with the incubators and accelerators of the world that are graduating out, these new ideas and try to, look at pipeline there. We also looked at who are the other investors we might share deal flow with, co-invest with, who are later stage investors that can flip deal flow, to us that might be too early for those folks to invest in directly. So how do we basically network up and down the sort of investing ecosystem to to get high quality referrals coming in from those sorts of partners. That's good and healthy, but kind of inherits some of the bias of, venture capital, which has resulted in, some of the, inequitable allocation of those resources across the country. So what else can we do differently? So we would also find non-investing, leaders in these sectors that we're interested in community colleges and the social determinants of health and Medicaid. Good entrepreneurs would find them even though they're not investors, and then they could refer deals to us. And then we would do top-down, sort of analyses and say, hey, how do we think what is the sort of retirement of baby boomers, the sort of squeezed care economy, what is that going to mean for low-income Americans? What are the entrepreneurial solutions that might present there? How do we find the businesses that are being built in that space? And then cold call, chase down, LinkedIn, poke, the entrepreneurs that we read about to try to find, those as well. But it's really a volume game. We probably look at 1,000 deals a year to get to 8 to 10 transactions every year.
And the entrepreneurs themselves, when you're looking at them, what is it you're looking at? Looking for, that's.
Yeah, I think that that's by far the most meaningful success factor. If you look at the companies that succeed and fail, it's more the companies that, more often than not, it's a function of leadership. And that's not, leadership doesn't guarantee success, but, the companies that we've seen fail, disproportionately have been as a failure of leadership. And I think for us, there's, what we believe is that we believe in the power of proximity, and the closer you are to the problem you're trying to solve, the better you are able to solve that problem. And so, I'm looking at a company right now that serves adolescents that have a severe mental illness diagnosis. So schizophrenia, bipolar, other diagnoses, focused on Medicaid. The founder himself grew up on Medicaid, severe mental illness diagnosis himself, was actually able to treat that early and has seen the power of this early intervention. It is now building a technology-enabled business to serve that. So we see, entrepreneurs that have lived these problems, understand these problems intimately. Those are going to be the entrepreneurs that we back. Those are going to be the entrepreneurs that have the grit to build the businesses successfully and know the problems well enough to design around those.
We've got several questions in the chat. Now, Frank, what's the best way to do this? Do you want to take 2 minutes and mute us, and then just give me the thumbs up when you're right, and I'll do a little interlude question while you're pulling your questions together. Does that make sense? Right, good. You mute us, and then put your kind of wave or gesticulate, Danielle, or watch, and then we'll just have we'll do a sort of an interlude question, that you don't miss too much of this. There's a really good question here that I'm going to come back to next, which is about when we get back from the interlude, which is around impact and how you measure. I know it's from one of my colleagues who's published on this, but I know Acumen has got a very specific, got a whole philosophy around this. So I think it'd be useful to talk about that philosophy and how you apply it to Acumen America. So think about that. I'm interested, Zaira, this is an interlude for people, Zaira, you can't probably, Zaira, shout, say something.
Hello.
It's on my camera, it's from Acumen as well. One thing that we haven't covered in our other discussions today is that, Acumen actually has kind of very useful resources, and that's why I wanted to kind of pull out. It's Acumen, I hope it's still called Acumen Academy, because that's good, because at one time there was a move to call it Acumen University, which I didn't like. But Acumen Academy. But I think it would be useful, I think this is sort of materials that really should be promoted more, to be honest. So you want to take a little bit just about what Acumen Academy does, because it does relate to what what Eamon's doing as well.
Absolutely. So Acumen Academy, there's a couple of vehicles that are resourced within Acumen Academy. One of them, which is the easiest to access, is we have free online courses for social entrepreneurs that are really geared to the specific needs of entrepreneurs that are looking to solve problems of poverty, either in the US or, globally. And we've also, because again, because we focus on leadership as an integral part of a successful entrepreneurial venture. We also have fellowship programs that are outside of the US. And we've also now started working more closely with other investors and other partners to develop both leadership accelerators in different parts of the world where we work, as well as sort of business accelerators. So again, we're really focused on what we call moral imagination. So people who have the leadership skills, but are also thinking about problems differently, who really have the grit just to solve problems in their communities, that want to stick with it, and that just need that support and some of the tools of business to see that through. So again, acumenacademy.org, and you can find free courses or low-cost courses, and you also get the opportunity to work for some of those courses, to work as part of a cohort. Social entrepreneurship can be somewhat of a lonely venture sometimes. When everyone's working on a for-profit tech solution, when you're trying versus you as an entrepreneur trying to solve some of the problems that you see in your community, that could be a very lonely venture and a lonely time. And so being part of Acumen Academy sort of solves for that as well. So again, just some of the resources that are available there.
So I look at it, so Elizabeth, I'll try and get to your question, but that might also be a kind of good resource for you to look at if you want to, if you're trying to build a social venture within your nonprofit, we could, that might be a good resource to.
That'd be great. That'd be really helpful.
It's free, which is
because we do workforce training, so it's really how to scale that to where you're not constantly having to find grants and can actually build a business around it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we should have a conversation about that because Amon and I just had a conversation this morning. There's different business models around this, and it's no one has cracked it yet, and it is something that some other people in Baltimore. So Henry here also could connect you. There are some other people who are working on that issue in Baltimore, particularly on how to create workforce development where we can create jobs that are not just low-paid jobs. That's one of the kind of issues. I see the two questions in the class. I'm going to start with the impact question, because I gave Amon the assignment to think about an answer to this. So Lourdes had asked about how actually you measured impact for the I think it was the workforce development business, but I think that because Acumen I know has a particular approach to thinking about impact, so maybe you could talk briefly about what the approach to measuring impact is, and also then about how you're using that in the Americas. So is that great?
Yeah. So, I think the sort of impact story starts in our due diligence process. So as we're evaluating an investment opportunity, we'll look at all the classic due diligence, questions. How big, what's the management team look like? What's the business model? What are the unit economics? How big is the market size? What kind of regulatory risks present? All the whole sort of host of commercial questions. We'll also ask a set of impact questions. What kind of impact does this have in somebody's life? For whom? At what scale? And it basically teaches us, what assumptions do we have to make? What are the embedded metrics that matter for this business? And so that diligence process surfaces sort of this, theory of change, which will kind of activate a set of metrics that we think are most important. So we go through, we get an investment approved, then we sit down with the entrepreneur to negotiate the investment documentation. So again, standard set of materials plus an additional side letter. And in that, we include a conversation around these metrics and say, hey, these are the 5 metrics that we think are most important about, this company. What's actually reasonable to track, and then, we have a conversation and what matters to you, because ultimately, if we're going to ask them to track a set of metrics that require them to hire another person to gather. That's not a sustainable answer. And if it doesn't matter to the company, we probably got it wrong, and it's probably not the right metric. So we land on a set of metrics, and then the company reports on those metrics to us every quarter. So we have basically over the lifetime of an investment, sort of a longitudinal impact data set to see, how the company is performing. And these are early stage businesses, so we will revisit this from time to time and say, hey, the business model's changed, so let's look at the metrics. They may change as well. And then as investors, we'll look at those as a team. We have a quarterly call where we go through our entire portfolio, look at the impact performance, see which way that's trending, what are we learning, and how do we manage the company? How do we manage this investment to optimize from the impact? How do we take those learnings and make a better investment next time? And ultimately, if companies, deviate from impact entirely, we have the ability to exit that investment. If a company goes from serving the Medicaid population to serving, high-income population exclusively, no longer in service of our mission, we have the ability to exit that investment as well. And our impact, which we never have had to do in Acumen America, but it gives us that protection in case the company deviates so significantly.
And for each of these sectors, how difficult is it to be able to collect that data to get it on a sort of a long-term basis? Time, is, often when I've talked to businesses and, about impact, they talk about time as being the factor. So time and money sometimes don't correlate with each other. There's sort of three dimensions to impact that we think about. There's, breadth. So how many people are you serving? Depth, how marginal or material of an impact are you having in their lives? And then for whom is this, what are the dimensions of the population that you're trying to serve by income, by race, by gender, by geography? And so the metrics that we select are seeking to answer some of those questions. And so, again, this, just had this conversation with this adolescent behavioral health company, and as we talked about it, the metrics that came up for that they track are, how many lives could we serve? So a health plan, a health insurance company will say, hey, you can serve up to 1,000 people. That's a number. How many they've actually enrolled. So maybe that's a couple hundred of that 1,000. That's a second metric. How many are engaged on the platform on a regular basis, which shows, some ability of sort of utilization. And then what are the outcomes? Does that actually, reduce the incidence of your next episode of severe mental illness? And so basically an outcome metric. And so for us, and then finally, what percentage of those are on Medicaid, which is a proxy for, do they map to our desire to serve low-income populations here in the U.S.? And so, that's the kind, and for the company, those metrics matter. They are in their contracts. They are, it's a commercial point about how many lives can I serve. They only get paid for people they engage, and so that's a metric that matters. And so they need to be able to show they're enrolling and engaging that population. And for their customers, they actually want to see that you're, reducing, the next incidence of a severe episode of the schizophrenia, whatever diagnosis you might have. And so all of these are really baked into the business model. So I think when, your impact value creation is, more closely embedded in your commercial value creation, and there's very little friction around collecting those metrics, because what measures ROI is actually the same thing that measures the impact. The further that those two come apart, if my impact is a byproduct of the thing that I sell, of my commercial value creation, that's when you get real tension around how do we actually measure that, and how cost effective is it for me to measure that. And so, and is that part of because some of the business I've looked at in the emerging world is, you wouldn't quite have to get that combination, would you? Your sanitation in shantytowns in Nairobi, paid for by fertilizing farmers outside of Nairobi, is a kind of they're kind of pulled apart, these two things. And so I wonder, when you're looking at actually investment opportunities, are you actually looking to combine that, make sure that metric is really embedded in?
Yeah, we talked earlier today about Samaritan, where, which is this the person who, pays for the technology is different, the entity that pays for the technology is different than the entity that uses the technology, which is different than the, individual that you have to engage to create value around the technology, which is different than the, then there's like even more stakeholders beyond that. And so I think there are business models where, you have to, where you're sort of like supply and, there's the where you will have that kind of divergence of, so basically supply and the, sort of revenue generating, aspects of the business. And I don't think we need to necessarily, merge those, but it does create a much more complex sort of impact data problem to solve.
Now I'm going to start turning this over. I'm going to give David Lingo back the first go. I'm Frank. I'm coming back to you. Don't worry. Okay.
Thank you, Murray. Thanks. Even so, I
You
through
may want to talk up because of the microphone.
right where is our mic?
It's somewhere.
Somewhere. Up there.
Yeah.
So through Murray's good offices, I had a chance to visit with your colleagues in Bogota a couple of years back and had a really interesting conversation with them. And I remember one of the most important parts of it was this issue of mission drift. Which, having worked in this space, I think before Acumen was created, that was a major issue where success actually creates a problem, right? Because you start to look more and more like traditional funding sources. So I'm just kind of curious, like how does Acumen manage that issue? And how do you, are there measurements available that enable you to sort of suss that out? Isuzu is a great story. But as a former VC, I go, that looks like a VC investment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Series B was led by SoftBank, very much
there you
not
go. There you go. So yeah, I'd like to talk about that. I think that's like a really interesting challenge.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing. I think that one of the inhibiting factors to the more wide the sort of scale of impact investing is case studies like Isuzu, which is still very early, although they've attracted, reached a high valuation and attracted all sorts of, capital, still needs to grow, grow into that and exit, I think, to really, show that full life cycle. But I think the more case studies we have like that, the more we can actually define, we can show that there is room for all sorts of capital to play in this, and that there's actually the presence of purely return motivated investment doesn't disqualify the impact that a company is creating, and in fact can be a manner of scaling that impact. And so I think that the risk is that, boy, it's hard to sell to community colleges, so let me sell to another kind of customer. Is there sort of like, I think where I see it in the early stage is when we invest kind of ahead of product market fit, and we're like, well, this should work in selling into CDFIs or into, Medicaid. Let's hope that it does, or federally qualified health centers. And it turns out, unsurprisingly, that's a super hard thing to do. So you can sort of repackage some of that, technology and sell it to a customer who has a higher willingness to pay, but a much lower impact profile. And so, for us, I think, the tension really comes up for us at that early stage. So the capital gap is most acute for these entrepreneurs, just as there's sort of emerging evidence around product market fit, yet that's where the impact risk is so high, because if you haven't really, confirmed that, gravity of like, hey, market's willing to pay for this thing, that's when you sort of run the risk. The other risk is that the market becomes small, and it's like, boy, it was great to sell into Medicaid, but there's Medicare, there's these commercial lines of business. And as over time that, pie chart that was once 80-20, impact aligned, customers to, 20 non-impact aligned, that becomes more diversified or more, of a minority of the business. So, that's also a risk. And I think we need to think carefully around, where do we believe that the market opportunity is? And will this, do we think that there's a path for the company to go there? For me, I think that, I like work hard to try to develop relationships with, traditional VCs that can plow into this, because for me, that's a part of the, bigger systemic change, is that they're, to help create these models like Isuzu that show that there's, there's a tiny fraction of, venture capital or, pre-IPO, private market investing is going into impact investing per se. How can we, broaden that tent and show that there's, there's just companies serving markets out here, and some of those companies happen to be of higher impact. And let's attract traditional dollars for those that can actually, reach scale. And then perhaps think about, the more philanthropically capitalized impact investing, push those dollars to wherever the next frontier is, maybe a different return profile of a different, quantum, or a different, sort of maturity, and then, move those dollars there. So the impact risk is impact mission drift is real for us. And I think that is the last thing the world needs, I think, is an impact fund in name only that has a, another impact, that has a portfolio that's sort of moved away from good intentions. And so I think that's that's something we want to spend, that's a risk we want to spend a lot of time mitigating.
I think there's, I try out something on you, because I think I've seen this with some of our student businesses. But I also want to ask you about one of your portfolio companies, because a place where I could see the drift happening is what I would call the Robin Hood strategy. And I thought, am I right that was a strategy? The Robin Hood strategy is one where, I've got product for, I've got the product for the poor in the market, and I'm going to just make a small margin off it. But this is a product that also could really go for, high net worth, and I'm going to make much more money off that. And wasn't that a strategy at one time that the business in the food business in Los Angeles we talked about? They were trying out, they were selling it at $4.99, but in the suburbs they were selling it for $9.99. Did that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, when we first looked at the business, there was like a cross subsidy model, which I think really does bring that impact risk question, because if you have, the contribution margin of of lines of business are different, the sort of, economic forces will draw you to the sort of most accretive activity. And, we sort of, I guess, invested against that common sense that would, be invested against that risk here in every table. But, but it's a little bit more nuanced there, in that, or has proven to be, in that, so the prices still are different in in retail locations in a lower income versus in a higher income. That's in part because the costs are different. And the actual cost of leases are much higher in these higher income areas than they are in lower income areas. And so and they sort of bake that into the sort of sticker, the ticket price for what they're selling. But what they've actually seen is that some of their highest performing stores are in low income areas, both in terms of volume and also in terms of contribution margin. And I think that's because not only is the cost basis higher in some of these higher income locations, but the competition is also much higher. In fact, they were in the food court they were in what's it called, Century City Mall or something like that, sort of the fanciest food court I'd ever been to. And it's like they're next to a salad between like a poke bowl place and a salad place, and it's like the value shop, even at, it's like I got a $15.99 poke bowl or a $9.99 every table bowl. Like that actually is not the same winning proposition as it is, in the Crenshaw Mall food court or in South LA. And so they actually found it more competitive and the cost basis was high. Now they're still there, but we've seen as a much more complicated story that's not one about like cross subsidy, but it's actually about kind of a little bit of a different retail strategy in these different locations.
Yeah, I think that's so I think that, I think that lesson about trying to, and work, because I mentor, students and also other social impact investors here. I actually like that view of sort of bringing the two business models together, and seeing if you can manage that. I'm going to consult with you later on how to recombine something that we use, a tool that Henry and I would use, right, for this. I'm going to privilege, Frank's Frank's class has got 3 questions. One is have you ever invested in a social enterprise business started by a returning citizen?
That's a good question. We don't ask as a matter of course. There's no sort of box to check. Not to my knowledge, although I would love nothing more than to do that. We're looking now at a company that's focused on expunging criminal records. How do you automate the expunging of criminal records for those records that are expungible in states where that's allowed, and do that. Right now, you could hire a lawyer and pay a lot of money to do that, and this is a tool to try to make that much more cost effective and at scale. We've looked at other models in the criminal justice space, but would love to. So I think the short answer is not to my knowledge. And I hope Frank, you're working with your class there, and we're on the whiteboards and some business plans, and gonna bring me some good deal flow. We would be very excited to look at entrepreneurs that are returning. So not yet is the short answer.
And Frank and Henry, has Marcus been working with this class?
No, not yet. No, Frank's class.
No.
I don't think so.
So Frank, you need to talk to Henry when you're back, because the entrepreneur residence we have in CEI is an entrepreneur who is a returning citizen, and he actually has a business that serves people who are still incarcerated. So Henry will link you up. I'm sure he'll be very helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay. So so the other question was from your African experience, people connected with Africa here. How many? And by the way, I should have said the textbook on entrepreneurship in Africa. The author of it is here, but it's the best-selling textbook on entrepreneurship in Africa. But women, the question was, when you were working with entrepreneurs in Africa, how many women entrepreneurs did you encounter? What percentage?
Yeah, and Sandra, you might know better the sort of
Yeah.
statistics globally than I have off the tip of my tongue. Do you?
Yeah, globally, we're actually, we're close to 50%. And it's actually a metric that we track now actively. Our portfolio we're tracking now some metrics called the 2X challenge. And so we're not just looking at companies that just have a woman as a founder, but it could be a co-founder, part of the leadership team, part of the board, and also how they approach their women customers, and also how they approach women who are their employees, and sort of training and how they engage women in the community as part of their team. So it's a big part of our global portfolio. It's a big part of our impact metrics.
We've just been starting to. This year, our annual review is in the next couple of weeks, and have been tracking some of those 2X metrics for the first time in the US. And it's actually a really useful question to ask of CEOs, to talk about the composition of their board or of their cap table or of their team, and it sort of drives a really opens a door to an important conversation. And in the US, 41% of our companies have a female founder. And then I think it's 58 or 59% have a BIPOC founder among their founding team. And I think 30% have a Black or Latinx CEO among the Acumen America portfolio.
I think somebody at the luncheon we were having today, I'd like to find the reference that they were referring was on a study that showed that the probabilities of a company, larger companies being totally diversified was heavily correlated with the diversity on the senior ranks. Did I hear that right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're at least starting that, starting and growing it from the start.
Well, it's an end in wealth creation too. If you think about it, if one of these startups does make it big, those first 10, 15, those early employees are going to be able to have a really meaningful wealth event. And so if you can, hire early as a company and, issue, ownership of that company in a way that's, equitable and, looks at that through a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that can be a meaningful wealth creation strategy as well for these companies that do go on to be successful.
And the last question from Frank's team was, for those, you talked earlier on about just how many deals you got to do to be able to select, 1,000 deals you might look at to select a. Do you refer any of the ones that you reject to other investment organizations or other people? Or?
Yeah, actively. I think that's we definitely see ourselves as, an ecosystem player and, I mean, I think all more entrepreneurs need to get funded. And so a no from us, ought to be a yes from somebody else. I think and if it's too early or if it's a sector that we don't invest in, we can refer folk or, needs a different kind of capital that we can't provide. We do have a Rolodex of other investors that we will refer the good deals to that just aren't a fit for our strategy or too early, too late, or in a sector that we don't actively invest in today.
So that's great. And so, we're just about at a. Yeah, I think we're just about the end of our time, we're just coming out. I usually get to ask the last question. I try and make it a sort of a common question. So you've now built up a team. How many people do you have in Acumen America now?
9 people.
9 people. So you're going, and Acumen itself has
116 employees.
Yeah, so, if you're a student or if you're a faculty member preparing, student to get into this field, to work in this field, what would be the critical skills they should be bringing or we should be teaching?
Yeah, I think, for an investing role, I think, it sort of depends on the job. There's lots of jobs that make these organizations go. There's, we have lawyers and accountants and, communications professionals, all sorts of, people that are responsible for building relationships and, bringing in the capital that enables this work to be done. So I think the sort of answer number one is kind of all the skills is basically what it takes to, build an organization. And I think, our work is irrelevant if we don't have the tools to communicate about it. Our work is impossible if we don't have the dollars to invest. And so it really is, sort of a collective that makes the work possible. I think from an investment, thinking about an investment role, I think the first skill is first attribute is really like hustle, grit. You're not sitting at like a Bloomberg terminal, like hitting print on the, latest data on, technology transformation models in Fresno, like you gotta go to Fresno and knock on some doors and, you got to talk to people real human beings that are experiencing these problems. And, so it's like creativity, hustle, grit to actually go out and find answers that are not, sort of like at your fingertips or at some database away. I think that there's like the sort of tools of like analysis, like one of my favorite parts about the job is that there's, I'm learning now about the 2 companies we're looking at are a criminal record expunging company and a severe mental illness in adolescents on Medicaid. And every quarter there's like new deals that I get to go up the learning curve on and, remarkable leaders that I get to connect with. And it's this, but the skill in that is how do you actually, drop into this sector that, how do you drop into a sector that you've got no context in and very quickly separate the, most important questions from the lesser important questions? And how do you sort of build an analytical model that you can adapt and very quickly over the course of a couple months, understand what sort of risks and return and impact look like. So there's sort of, tools of analysis and I think prioritization more so than, like deep financial modeling. The reality is at the pre-seed and seed stage, you could spend 100 hours building a financial model and I guarantee you it'll be wrong. The only sure thing that will generate is the wrong answer. So, I think it's like, it's great. It's analysis. I think it's like caring. It's like giving a hoot about the problems that we're trying to solve. There's easier jobs where you can make more money. So do you actually care about these problems? And if you don't, then this is the wrong line of work. You're not going to, have it. You're not going to have what it takes to sort of stick with it. And then I think the last thing is like kind of a, some edge on some of these sectors. If you are, if I'm looking at a resume and someone has been, has worked as a doula and understands birth justice, I'm like, well, that's interesting. You probably have a lens on health equity that, somebody else doesn't, so like some experience or curiosity or interest in the sectors, the problems that we're trying to solve. I think that's going to be an edge as well. So I think those are, some of the things that I look for. So just, you know, all you have to do is package that up in a course, Murray, and then you got it.
Well, one thing that we do well on here is grit and hustle, you know, and when you think of our students, you know, average age is undergraduate is 30, and the average age of a graduate student is 35, and you know, and their life experiences, and you know, you see, I think these are the kind of students that I think can go out to Fresno and walk the streets and talk, you know.
Yeah.
So I would.
But they come to us that.
And they come to us.
We can really add value to this. That's what you're saying, dropping into situations and making
Absolutely.
sense of it quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of business schools really struggle with that.
Mhm.
And that's a very cool and generalized skill
Yeah.
too, right? It's not just the package.
Mhm.
It's a very.
And so Elizabeth, you don't mind if a student connects with you?
Absolutely not. No, I love it.
So,
Yeah.
you just email me, and Elizabeth, and I'll get you his, you know, Eamon's email address. And so listen, I really want to thank you. I think, you know, this is our last Team of the Dean for this semester. And I think it, you know, I think it's the appropriate one for the end of the semester. None of you are there, and unfortunately, I've never been invited to Jessup to do this, but I do. When I do my orientation to students, you might remember this, I do a little speech, and I talk about how if it were the Dean of Nursing over at University of Maryland, Baltimore, or the Dean of Medicine over there, they would be doing the same orientation speech, and they would be talking about medicine, you know, nursing as a vocation. But, you know, you don't expect the Dean of Business to talk about business as a vocation. But, you know, I asked the students to think about this, about, that, your business has an impact. You know, what we do has an impact. It's a service that we do, you know, and how we do it, you know. So that's why it's important to learn. You know, obviously I wish everybody, all students, ample wealth. But I think it's important we realize we do this well because we make an impact. And I think when we see these projects, you know, it kind of reminds us that, you know, good business thinking, I think, can actually be a contribution to social change. So Eamon, I want to thank you. We'll give you a clap here. And thank you very much, everybody who did it virtually. I know you get there. Frank, particularly, thank you for your class. I wish you great success in this. And so thanks for doing this. Okay, bye. All right.